all, just acknowledging who you are in our lives, God, acknowledging that you are God and you are God all by yourself, God, that there is none beside you, there are none like you, God. We honor you, we bless your name, God. We praise you today because only you can do what you do, God. And we thank you for it now in the name of Jesus, God. We ask right now, God, as we come into this place and we gather with only your worship and your praise and your furtherment of the kingdom in our minds, God. We ask that you would bless this time, God, that you would nourish this time, God, that this time may be nourishing to our spirits, God, and our souls, God, that we may grow in you, God, and that you may be glorified and the church may be edified, God. We ask right now, God, that you would honor this time, God, and that you would bless each and every one of us that have the desire to come tonight, those of us that are here and those of us that could not make it, God, that you bless us, God, that we would be able to grow and give your name glory in all that we do, God. This and all that we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so last week, well, we started 2 weeks ago, and we started with talking about, what were we talking about? Anybody remember what we talked about 2 weeks ago? Our connection. There it is. It was the disconnect that deception built, is what we talked about 2 weeks ago. We talked about how deception, when deception is operating, how it can disconnect us and we're not even be aware that we're disconnected. We talked about some symptoms and some signs that we are disconnected and operating in deception. The first of those being misplaced love, the second being pride rising in our lives, and the last one being spiritual incontinence, meaning that we are out of control spiritually and emotionally. Then last week we talked about being conditioned for connection. All right, we learned that last week there are some things that we have to not only take on, but put off if we are to really be in connection and be partakers of this union with God. And so, anybody remember any of the things that we said last week that we needed to do to be conditioned for connection? Some of the things that we needed to separate ourselves from. We talked about how just certain places that we're in, whether that be emotionally, physically, spiritually, those places can be a hindrance to our connection with God. We talked about how certain people can be a hindrance and a certain type of person or people that can be a hindrance. We talked about where in 2 Timothy, Paul warned Timothy about these certain types of people who will come in and attach themselves to the people of God unnoticed, seemingly, and will begin to divide and conquer, essentially. And so Paul writes to Timothy and says, beware of these people, these people. And then he tells Timothy to warn his people. He says, you have to make sure that you prepare your people because these people are looking for certain types of people. He says they're drawn to, the Bible says they were drawn to women who were dealing with guilt and and driven by passion. But we know that that universally applies to the saints of God. If you are one of those people who are always looking for the next big thing, always looking for the next wind of doctrine, Paul says that these people will come in and attach themselves to you, and they will use what you intended for good, your passions and your what you intended when you were searching for new things. He said they'll use that against you, and they'll divide you and separate you from the flock. Continuing in that theme, tonight we're going to talk about the currency of connection. The currency. So we talked about the disconnect that deception built, and we talked about being conditioned for connection, and now we're talking about the currency of connection. In other words, what do I get from being in connection with God? Now, when you say that like that, it seems such a reckless question, right? When you hear that question, somebody says, what do I get out of being in a relationship with God? It seems so silly for somebody to ask that question. But the reality of it is, many people ask that question, whether they say it verbally or not. Many people ask that question. And on top of that, if you don't ask that question, you are possibly missing what God has for you in this connection that you form with God. We must know what God is offering and what we are to become partakers of if we are to be effective in this connection. This connection is not just, and I say this all the time, and we have to be careful of this. This connection is not just about us going to heaven. If you are living your life looking for something in the future and missing what's right now, you are not getting what God has for you. And so that's what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about what's in this connection, this currency of connection. What is in this for us? And what does God expect out of us? And so we talked about this last week. We're going to continue in that. Going to 2 Peter chapter 1. 2 Peter chapter 1. So let me ask you guys, what are some guesses of things that we should expect out of this connection with God? What do you guys expecting? Fellowship. Fellowship. What does that mean? Fellowship. That's actually good. That's a word that God uses in relation to this connection. What does it mean, though?
A relationship, being able to talk and, him be able to, just on a day-to-day basis.
Okay.
Direction, instruction that come from.
Okay, anybody else? I mean, that word translates in English to what we know today as partakers. To become partakers of. That means that we are partaking of each other. It means I am bringing something and I am taking something. All right, that's what fellowship means. Fellowship means I'm bringing something and I'm taking something. We are partaking of whatever it is that we are fellowshipping. All right, we become partakers of. And that's one of the words that God uses in this text to tell us what we're giving. And fellowship is definitely first and foremost. How many of y'all know that there's some people that it's just good to know. There's some people that it's just good to be in connection with. When I go places and I tell them that my apostle is Apostle Billy Hines, it's just good to be in connection with some people. Really, I mean, I've been in places where I've been in connection with people that I couldn't say their name. You understand what I'm saying? I had to hide who I was in connection with. But whenever I say my apostles Billy Hines, I never heard anything come back bad about that. Always praise. It's just good to be connected to people, to be in fellowship. That's first and foremost. God says it's just good to be in connection. It's good to be counted among the children. Amen. All right, so let's go into the text. We are in 2 Peter chapter 1. We're going to kind of, I won't say exegete this text, but we're going to exposit this text. So we go in here, and one of the things that you notice about this text, first off, is that if you read this text just at face value, it looks like this text can be redundant. I mean, Peter is asking us to do things that seem so, like it seems like this is the same thing as that, and that's the same thing as that, and it doesn't, how does this build? It just seems like it's a redundancy until you actually unpack the text and see that it's not redundant at all, and it's actually very specific about what he needs and what he's asking of us. All right, so let's go there. 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 1. It starts like this. Simon Peter, a servant and an apostle of Jesus Christ, to them who have attained like precious faith with us through the righteousness of God and our Savior Jesus Christ. All right, so we talked about this last week. Who is this text addressed to? Us. It's addressed to us. Anybody, he doesn't mention any particular group aside from those that have obtained like precious faith with us. So if you have obtained like precious faith or the same precious faith as they have, then he's talking to you. All right? We talked about last week how that actually saves us a step in the exegetical process, because now we don't have to find out what he meant to the original audience, because we are part of the original audience. Does that make sense? All right. So he says, I'm talking to Anybody who has obtained like precious faith with us through the righteousness of God and our Savior Jesus Christ. Now, we look at the first verse, and we often assume that this is just Peter giving his salutation. This is just his greetings. And we miss the basis of this text. Peter sets a basis for this text in verse 1. In verse 1, he says, not only am I talking to these certain group of people, which is anybody who has obtained like faith with us, but then he says, this is how the faith is obtained. This is the, we talked about last week, the title deed, or how somebody, we talked about when you buy a car, the first thing I need from somebody, if I'm going to buy a car from you, is a title. I need to know that you own whatever it is you're trying to sell me. And so this is what Peter is saying in verse 1. He's telling us that all that is about to follow comes on the back of who? Of what, shall I say? In the first verse, he tells us. He says, everything I'm about to tell you comes on the back of the righteousness that we have obtained through God and Jesus Christ our Savior. Everything that I'm about to discuss comes on the back of this. That's important, because if we miss that, when he starts listing the things that we're supposed to do and have, we think that those things come from us. But he sets and establishes this in the first verse, that these are not of us. Everything that I'm about to tell you comes on the back of the righteousness that you receive from the work of God in Jesus Christ. This is not about you. This is only what you have access to because it's about him. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right, so let's start there. He says, I'm basing this on the backs of the righteousness of God and the Savior Jesus Christ. And then he says, watch this, grace and peace be multiplied unto you through the knowledge of God and of Jesus our Lord. All right, we talked about this, grace and peace be multiplied. All right, now, before we even get into the deepness of that, can we take a moment and appreciate what the text says? It says, grace and peace be multiplied unto you through the knowledge of God and Jesus our Lord. Now, if anybody in here has ever, the peace and grace are there are these things that you don't ever think about what it's like not to have them until you've been without them. Yeah. Anybody, you don't appreciate peace until you've been through a season with no peace. Yeah. You understand? Like, you don't appreciate health until you've been sick. Yeah. So before we even get into the vastness of this text, let's stop and say, grace and peace are offered unto us. Anybody need grace? Amen. Anybody need peace? Yes. He says these things are offered unto us, and they're offered unto us to be multiplied. And that right there is good news. That's good news. These things are offered unto us. The fact that God thought enough of me to give me the chance to get and to bless me with initial grace and peace is amazing. But then he says, I want to give you the chance to get it multiplied. I want it to pervade you. I want it to be overflowing, emanating from you. That's a blessing. Yeah. And so he says, now, grace and peace be multiplied unto you through the knowledge of God and of Jesus our Lord. All right. Now, taking this verse, we're moving kind of quick, so I'm going to slow down. All right. So we're going to take this verse and we look at this. Now, watch this. We've learned and have known that grace and peace were gifts of God, right? What is grace? Somebody tell me the definition of grace.
Unmerited favor.
Unmerited favor. Unmerited favor is the definition of grace given. And what now that unmerited favor. Now, watch this. Unmerited favor means what? What does the word unmerited mean?
You don't really deserve it.
Don't deserve it, can't earn it, didn't earn it. Let's say that.
Right. We
know that from our understanding of the text that we cannot earn it. But even more, before we get to that, let's start with did not earn it. Grace is did not earn favor. Yeah. Does that make sense? He says you didn't earn it. So grace. Now, so this causes a problem in my mind initially, because if I didn't earn it, couldn't earn it, how is it then that Peter tells me that they can be multiplied unto me?
Through the knowledge of Jesus Christ.
Yes, he tells me that, but if I didn't earn it in the first place, how do you tell me I can get more of it by earning it? That don't make sense to me. If you tell me, okay, I'm going to give you this, and you didn't earn it, you can't earn it, I'm just going to give it to you. It's a gift, right? And then I say, but you got to earn it. Anybody confused by that? Yeah, I'll be too. One of those things is not like the other. All right, so automatically we go into the text and we see turmoil. We see this conflict in the text already. We only in verse 2. Unmerited favor, he says, and then he tells me, well, it can be multiplied unto you through the knowledge of God. So we have a decision to make. The first decision we have to make is, what are we talking about? What are we talking about? I taught a class on communication, and one of the things about communication that often tricks people, well, the first thing about communication that often tricks people is that people think it's innate. They think that you're born knowing how to communicate. That's a lie. You can learn to talk on your own, but you got to learn to communicate in the group. You got to know what the dynamic is to communicate. All right, but the one of the biggest things about communication that leads to arguments and miscommunication is the different perceptions. You ever been talking to somebody and it seemed like y'all was talking about the same thing, and you find out 30 minutes into the argument, we're not even talking about the same thing? We're not communicating. We're talking, but we're not communicating. All right, and so the first thing that you have to do when you communicate is you have to say, me and my wife had this thing now, whenever we feel like an argument's about to come, we say, wait, stop, let's communicate. What are we talking about? And 9 times out of 10, that's where we get a turnaround right there, because she'll say, well, we talking about the fact that these yellow things on the blue chair. And I'm like, no, I was talking about how many chairs are in the row. We're not even talking about the same thing. We're about to argue for 2 hours, and we're not even arguing about the same thing. All right, so we stop and we say, what are we talking about? Then we can pick one of those 2 conversations to actually have, right? Now, with this text, what am I saying? We got to ask this text, what are we talking about? Because there are 2 different things that I just said that conflict each other seemingly. I said one was undeserved, could not earn, did not earn. And then I said another one was earned by the knowledge of God, right? Now, what are we talking about? The first thing we have to understand is that this grace and peace that we're talking of right now is not the gift of grace and peace that we know. This is not the unmerited favor that we know. All right? This is attributes of God. In other words, these are connected to God. A gift, if I give you a gift, that's yours. That's no longer connected to me except for the fact that I bought it. But once I gave it to you, you now take ownership of whatever I gave you. Does that make sense? All right. And it doesn't really matter to me what you do with that gift. I mean, I may be hurt, but I have no say in what you do with something that belongs to you, right? But the way Peter describes this is that this is not gift, but this is attributes of God. This is God saying that I will reveal the grace and peace that is me unto you, the more of it that you desire, or the more that you learn me, the more of this you'll know. All right? Does that make sense? I'm explaining. All right, so he says, grace and peace be multiplied unto you through the knowledge of God. Here's the redundancy that I'm talking about. If you see here, he says in verse 2, he tells us the knowledge of God, right? As we grow in the knowledge of God. And he says down here in verse 4, he says, well, let's go to verse 5. He says, and besides this, giving all diligence, add to your faith virtue, and to your virtue knowledge. Wait a minute, Peter. We already have knowledge. That's how we get in the grace and peace, right? I don't understand why we're going backwards. You told me to get knowledge, and that's how I get grace and peace. Then you told me to go and add to my knowledge virtue. And then you told me to add to my virtue knowledge. Some men lining up. Why am I going backwards? Right? Now, this is where our English language limits us in some of these things. So we have to go back and read what they mean to the writer so that we can better translate that for us today. Does that make sense? All right, so we go back to verse 2. He says, and the word knowledge here is a different word, knowledge, a different word for knowledge than is listed in verse 5. All right, the word that we see in verse 2 is epigenoskos. All right, epigenoskos is the word that means, and I'm reading this from Strong's, it is a precise and correct knowledge, or it is the acknowledgement of God. All right? Now, if we were to put that definition back into the text, right? Now, when you're doing this is important. Whenever you get a revelation, you get an understanding of a word. You have to go back and put that word back in the text with the understanding that you have, and make sure that you did not change the text. Does that make sense? All right. And so now we just learned that this knowledge means a full or precise or accurate knowledge of God, or the acknowledgement of God. In this case, it means the acknowledgement of God and the full knowledge of God. But understand that we will not operate in the full epigenoskos until we see God, until we see Jesus. And even then, we will still be operating up to epigenoskos. All right? And so that means the full and complete. How many of you think you know God completely and fully? You'd be a fool to think that. And so we won't have the fullest extent of the word epigenoskos. We won't have the fullest extent of that word until we are in the presence of Jesus. All right? The resurrected Jesus. All right. And so what we are left with of this to apply to this text currently is the acknowledgement of God. All right? And so when we read this, he says, grace and peace be multiplied unto you through the acknowledgement of God and of Jesus our Lord. All right? He says, according as to what, that's verse 2. Now we're talking about that word acknowledgement. He's saying essentially the more that you lean on God. I think another verse said it like this: trust in God and lean not unto your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him. That's how another verse said it. Same thing he's saying. He's saying the more that you acknowledge God and lean into or lean on God, the more grace and peace you'll find. Does that make sense? All right. Now, and then he says, according as his divine power. Now, this word according is important. Y'all know I like words, right? And so this word according to, or this phrase according to, is powerful because it tells you that this is out of or coming from whatever it's attributed to. All right? And so that means if y'all know me and I got no money, and I said I'm gonna give you $20, you have $20 according to me, right? How much is that worth? Nothing, because I ain't got nothing. But if you know Jamal, and Jamal got millions, and Jamal said I'm gonna give you $20, and now you have $20 according to Jamal, how much is that worth? Because it's according to, or based on, or coming from what I already have. So when he says according to his divine power, that means out of the divine power of God. We're not just talking about power that is bestowed. We're talking about power that comes from the divine power of God. That's a powerful power. All right? And so now this word power means to us, it means, this is the word for dunamis. All right? The dunamis is the word that we get our word dynamite from. Everybody has heard that, right? Dynamite, dunamis means the explosive power of God, right? Well, there's another meaning to this, and I think I taught this. But there's another meaning to this, and it means the effort put forth. In other words, you will have as much of this as you put forth the effort to get. Does that make sense? So he says, according to the divine power, he has given unto us all things that pertain to life and godliness. Now, if I were to back this verse up, I might say something like, he is a rewarder of them that diligently seek him, right? That might say that you are as rewarded as you are in your diligence. Does that make sense? So you are given all things that pertain to life and godliness, but only as much as you seek it or put forth the effort to get. That's what dunamis means. It means the amount of effort put forth. All right? And so you have as much of this, you have as much access to grace, peace, and power as you put forth the effort to get. So if you are lazy in your study, you will not have power. You are lazy in your prayer, you will not have grace, you will not have peace, you will not have power. You will have as much of this as you come and get. All right? Now, we're talking about the nose. Now, and then he says, let's go down. He says, power has given us all things that pertain unto life and godliness. Watch this now. He says, we have all things that pertain unto. Okay, let me make this. Where are all things that pertain unto life and godliness?
In him.
In him, what according to the text says what? Go before that. What does he say? Read verse 3. He says, according as his divine power has what? Given unto us. Where are the things that pertain to godliness and life? It's given unto us. And this text is confusing me, y'all, because I just said I can only have as much of it as I come and get. But then the text tells me that it's all in me already. What am I missing? All right. So we're going to talk about that. Let's go. He says, according to my, now watch, he says, now this word knowledge, through the knowledge of him that called us to the glory and virtue. All right. He says, we have all things that pertain to life and godliness, but we have them through the knowledge. Now, this word knowledge is different from the word knowledge that we see in verse 2. All right? This word, this one is not, I'm sorry. This word is the same as the one we see in verse 2. We're going to get to the different one in a second. Of him that called us. So again, he's saying to us, this thing is, I'm going to see if I can make sense of this right quick. Here's what he's saying. I put it all in you. But you can only have access to as much of it as you understand. And so what he's saying is that if this is what we are dealing with, the grace, peace, power, he says, as you learn me, what I'll do is I'll uncover things for you. And you'll have access to as much of it as you understand. And as you understand it, I'll continue to pull back the veil and you'll begin to see more powerfully what's inside of you already. All right. Does that make sense? All right. Now he says, so you already got it in you, but you don't have access to it because you don't understand it. Because anything that you have and do not understand, you are almost certain to abuse it. When you have something that you do not understand and do not value because you do not understand it, you will abuse it. And God says, I cannot have you abusing this system, this grace, this peace, this power. You can't abuse it. So until you understand it, you can't have it. All right? So he says, now we're going to verse 4. He says, whereby are given unto us exceeding great and precious promises. Whereby given unto us exceeding great and precious promises, that by these ye might be partakers of the divine nature, having escaped the corruption that is in the world through lust. All right. Verse 4 says to us what? We are whereby. Now, if I just came up to you and started talking to you, right? And the first thing I said to you is because we're going to have a problem, right? Nobody understands what I'm saying. You ain't said nothing to me, and I walk up to you and said, because of this. You said, what are you talking about? Yeah, we don't start sentences right there. Well, guess what? Neither does God. So when we see this whereby, it begs us to go backwards. He's saying because of something, but if I don't understand what he's saying because of, ain't no point in going forward because I don't understand what's behind it. Does that make sense? So I got to go backwards. Whereby? Whereby what? What? Anybody? Whereby what? What is the reason we are given this exceeding great and precious promise? Anybody?
What's the question?
What is the cause, or what does this whereby mean in verse 4? Or this because of? What does that mean? What is he referring to?
We may share in the divine nature.
We may share in his divine nature. Okay. That's one of the promises. Mm-hmm.
It's whereby, like saying therefore.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Escaping, since you've been given this divine power,
Mm-hmm.
and you have all things for godliness.
So what he's saying, that what she just said is, since you have been given this divine power. So the whereby refers to the divine power that we were given through the knowledge of God, or that we are given through the knowledge of God. He's saying because of this divine power, which we got because of what? Acknowledgement or knowledge of God, right? He's saying because of this thing that happened because of this thing, now I'm going to tell you what you get because of it, right? We're talking about the currency of connection. He says because of this divine power, and because we are now beginning to be partakers of, or at the point of salvation, we are partakers of the divine nature of God. He says, because of this, God is able to give us exceeding great and precious promises. That by these, by what? Makes sense to anybody? By what? He says, according to as his divine power hath given unto us all things that pertain unto life and godliness, through the knowledge of him that hath called us to glory and to virtue. He says, whereby are given unto us exceeding and precious promises, that by these ye might be partakers of the divine nature. All right, now, if we don't understand what these are, you cannot be a partaker of the divine nature. Because he explicitly says, these are how you become partakers of the divine nature. What are these?
Promises.
These precious promises. These precious promises. Somebody say that's important. It's important for us to know what makes us partakers of the divine nature of God. Lest we be fooled into thinking we had a right to this. All right? You did not have a right to this. You got this by grace. And so you need to understand what is given to you and how you get it, how you obtain it. Does that make sense? All right? So he says, these are that you may be partakers of the divine nature, having escaped the corruption that is in the world through lust. And so by these, he's talking about not just the promises, but he's saying these attributes of God that we are now partakers of. By these, we have now become partakers of the divine nature by the knowledge of Christ and God, which then brought us grace, peace, and power, right? Not gifts, but attributes of God. What's the difference between a gift and an attribute?
A gift is given, the attribute is something you have.
Right. And a gift is something I give you and now becomes disconnected from me. An attribute is something you have to go through me to get. You only access it through me. If I give you a house, you're welcome to go to the house whenever you feel like it. If the house is my attribute or an attribute of me, you got to go through me to get to the house. Does that make sense? So all three of these, grace, peace, and power, this dunamis, are given to us only by way of Christ. That's why he says to us, you only get it if you understand it. You only get it if you come after it through knowing Christ or acknowledging Christ, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Tell me if I'm losing you. All right. And so he says, now, because of these divine attributes of God that we become partakers of, now we can take on the divine nature of God and escape the corruption, or we can become partakers of the divine nature of God and escape the corruption that is in the world through lust. That's already one of the promises right there. Isn't it good to know that God has provided a way for us to get out of the hell that we provided for ourselves?
Wow. Yeah.
He said, you made a mess of things down here, and until you accept me, you live in that mess. But he says, I'm giving you a way by my grace and my peace and my power to come above those things and live under the divine government of God. Anybody want to be under God's government?
Yes.
All right, so he says, this is what I'm giving you. That's the promise that I'm offering you, along with the attributes and the access to the attributes of God, right? I'm offering you a way out. Well, let me say that a way up. All right. And so he says, now the word, let me see if this is right. Okay. And besides this, we're in verse 5 now. Now he's about to list to us some things that, if you're not careful, you believe are a checklist to assuring your salvation. Because we've heard this text presented many times as a checklist of things that we have to do or behaviors that we have to make us saved. Anybody ever heard that? How many of you know that behaviors don't make you saved? Mindsets don't make you saved. You are saved by grace through faith. That is the only salvation. And your security in salvation comes in what the Bible talks about faith, in understanding the hope. Yes, sir.
So, what if behaviors or like actions that can keep you out of the kingdom of heaven?
Say that one time.
What if behaviors or actions that can keep you out of the kingdom of heaven?
Behaviors in themselves, that's a good question, because I mean, to be honest, we place way too much emphasis on behaviors. All right? Because it comes from the idea that a man or woman can be changed from the outside in, which is false thinking. If you are dealing with a homosexual spirit, even if you do not engage in homosexual acts, you are still dealing with the spirit internally. And just because you don't act like a homosexual doesn't mean you don't battle the spirit. Does that make sense? So I can make you act straight all day. Does that make you straight? Doesn't. So I can make you act saved all day. Does that make you saved? And if you are saved, being changed on the inside, what's on the inside represents what's on the inside. What's on the outside represents what's on the inside. And so what happens on the outside is not something that I can check, or is something that as believers we should check, but not something that I can check to say where you are, but it's something that is an indicator of where you are. Yes, ma'am.
So it's attitude or behavior or action?
It can be both. Attitude is more of a mindset, but it stems from pride. That's what we'll just be honest. An attitude stems from pride. It's a feeling of, I don't know how to say that. It's a feeling of superiority almost, to say that I am better than or greater than something else, and it says that you don't have the right to treat me a certain way. And so because you do that, I'm going to show you how much better or greater that I am than that thing. And so my attitude says that I am not submitted. I'm out of control. Right? Which is, it's a, I don't know, I wouldn't say, I said that it could be both, but I guess it would be situational to say which one it actually is at the moment. Apostle? Okay. Yes. But I'm saying that to say that my behavior should be a self-indicator. That shouldn't be what you look at to decide whether or not I'm saved. But that should be what I look at to say, what are the fruits of what's on the inside? Because here's the thing. As people of God, or as people in general, you bear fruit. You are like a tree. You bear fruit. And you bear fruit of whatever takes root in you. And so the idea that I'm neutral is false. You're going to bear fruit. And I can tell from the fruit you bear, and you should tell from the fruit you bear, what has taken root in you. If what comes out of me doesn't represent God, that means that what's in me doesn't represent him either. There's no way that you can have what represents God on the inside and what come out be conflicting with that. Neither is there a way that you can represent God on the outside and not have him truly be on the inside. That's why Paul says again, when we talk about them having the form of godliness but not denying the power of, they're easily found out, even though they look like something, they're easily found out because they don't maintain the power. That is the difference between the saved and the unsaved. So all that believed in him gave he them power. That's what separates us. Because to be Christian, to walk the Christian life takes power. To be transformed takes power that is beyond us. All right? Again, so we're getting into this list, and this list seems like it's a list of behaviors that you got to abide by if you're going to be saved. We treat it like salvation as a club. If you want to get in here, I need to check your resume and see if you have this stuff on this list, right? But it's not like that at all. That goes against everything we just talked about. Peter built the basis of this text in verse 1 saying everything I'm about to tell you is based on what? The righteousness that I have obtained through God and Jesus Christ. In other words, you won't do these things if you have not obtained the righteousness of God and Jesus. These are not things that you can do in and of yourself. All right? Which is why we as believers got to stop being upset with people who are not believers and out of control.
Yeah, come on.
It's a sign that they're not a believer. That's just what they do. How you going to get mad at a sick person for being sick? It's what they are. All right? So, let's go into this. He says, besides this, giving all, there's that word again, diligence. Giving all diligence. Be diligent. Be persistent. Be relentless. Always moving forward, never going backwards. All right? In your efforts to, another word says to respond to God's promise. All right? All right, so God gives us this promise, but here's how you know that this promise is contingent. Because he tells us in another verse, he says to respond to God's promises. All right? Now, God can promise us something. If we don't respond, do you have it? If I say tomorrow, I'm going to give you $30, but you got to call me and remind me. If you don't call me, what happens? You don't get it. Does that make my promise any less valid? Just means you didn't do what you're supposed to do. You didn't attain it. Now that sounds silly, right? All you had to do was call me and get it, and you didn't get it. That sounds silly. That's what we do to God all the time. All the time. That's all you got to do is follow my word. Submit to me, lean on me, and you'll get all of these things. And you say, I forgot to call you. I just got busy. I forgot. How foolish is that? You lacking in power. You lacking in peace. Your house is in turmoil. Your mind is in chaos. Because you forgot. All right? And so he says, beside this, giving all diligence, add to your faith virtue. Virtue. If we go into this in the Amplified version, I like this, what it says in the Amplified. Verse 5, Amplified says, for this reason, adding your diligence to the divine promises, employ every effort in exercising your faith to develop virtue, which is excellence, resolution, and Christian energy. How many of you just lost your fervor? You become complacent in your connection. We lost the diligence, we lost the fervor. And now he's saying to us, we have become less diligent because we've become complacent. You're not chasing after these promises of God. And it's funny because we especially as people of God, our logic sometimes eludes me. Because it's funny that you believe that God should keep his word when you don't keep yours. Like, I can see, like, the covenant is different. God made a word with himself, and he became the covenant partner with himself. He's going to keep that word regardless. But when God says, I'll give to you as you give to me, and you don't give, you still looking for God to give to you. Where's the reason in that? And got the nerve to be upset when you don't see it. We got all these Christians looking for sugar daddies. I don't know where this thing came. That's real. You just come to God when you need something. You think that I can exchange one night of worship or one night of crying or one night of praying for a lifetime of goods? And this is how we reason, because when we stop seeing the hand of God, we say, I must not be worshiping, right? I'm going to get back and worship until I start seeing the hand of God again. And as soon as we see God move, we go back to what we were doing. You're not in relationship. God don't operate like that. And so so he says, I have to add to my faith. Now, if we talk about the word faith, let's go there for a second. Hebrew. Now, let me ask you guys, what is the definition of faith?
The substance of things unseen that we hope for.
The substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. That is the only definition that the Bible gives of faith. Do y'all know that? The only definition that the Bible gives of faith. Say that again, sir. There it is. That's the definition of what faith is not. We'll take that. Amen. Whatever is not faith is sin. That's a great definition of the alternative to faith. But the definition that it gives to us is now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. The word substance comes from a Greek word called hypostasis. All right. The Greek word hypostasis comes from two words, which is hypostasis. All right. Hupo means sub or under. Stasis means stand. All right. We put those two words back together in English, we get understand or understanding. Now faith is the understanding of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. All right. Now, that being said, that's the long way around. That's the long way around of saying what the word means. The word we translate to faith in the Bible in English now is the word pistis. The word pistis, which means to be persuaded, which comes from the word paisto. All right, paisto, and paisto means it was a Greek goddess of persuasion. All right, now they lived in that time where that was prevalent, so it makes sense that they used what they knew to define. They're not mixing the sacred and the defiled. They're not mixing that. They're just describing in a way that they can understand. Does that make sense? All right. So it means persuaded, or to be so persuaded as to comply with, which is where we get James saying faith without works is dead. In other words, what he's saying, he's not saying, in contrast to Paul saying that faith is what saves. He's not saying that you have to work to show faith. He's saying that if faith exists without works, really faith doesn't exist. Does that make sense? That's a counterfeit faith. A faith that does not promote action is a counterfeit faith. All right? And so when he talks about this, he's saying to us, we have to add to our persuasion, add to our understanding these things, this list. Now, again, who is doing the adding? Who says we are doing the adding? I am adding. All right. Now, who says we're not? You say, okay. You got what it says both. All right. Now, if we go back to verse 1, he tells us what? He sets the precedence for this whole text from verse 1. Go ahead.
Well, I thought you said that we couldn't do anything in of ourselves. But
I did.
It requires the power.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, how can we add unto ourselves if we can't do anything? He's giving it to us. Outside that power.
Absolutely.
So it's him that's doing the adding.
Absolutely. I never said you were wrong. I was going to do it.
Sure.
Yes, sir. That's right.
Okay.
That's correct. He tells us in verse 1 that everything I'm about to say in this chapter, everything I'm about to give you, is not on your back. It's on the back of he says this is on the back of the righteousness that we've obtained through God and Jesus. Everything I'm about to go, the precursor to everything I'm about to say, is on the back of Jesus and God, not you. That's where we get mixed up in this text, and you're trying to do things that are not in you to do. All right? And so he says, no, that's number 1. And then number 2, he says in verse...
what about the divine? He says, according to the divine power.
Right. Now, watch this. Watch this. He says, verse 3, let's read it. Verse 3 says, he says in verse 3, according as his divine power hath what? Given unto us all things. He has given unto us all things. All right? So is he giving things? Is he? Read the text. What does it say?
Verse 4, he says he's given unto us.
Well, now y'all got to understand, words mean everything. What's the difference between giving and giving?
It's already done.
It's already done. Now, that's what he's saying. When he's talking about adding to these things, he's not saying that we have to add or that God is adding to us. Remember, all things that pertain to life and godliness are already given unto us. So what did I tell you guys earlier? All God is doing is that as you understand it, he's revealing what's already in you. But you don't have access to what you don't understand. All right? Bible says it like this, and all you'll get a what? All right? He says you have all of these things in you. They're just shielded by your ignorance. Does that make sense? He said you have, now watch when we talk about dunamis, right? Dunamis says you have access to as much of this as you what? As you come and get, as you put forth the effort. So we always talk about dunamis meaning the explosive power of God. There is another definition of dunamis that means the amount of effort put forth. All right? He's saying to us, you have as much access to this as you put effort forth to get. All right? So remember, everything is in us already. It's not being given, or it's not being given, it is given. All right? Everything you need for life and godliness is where? In me. It's given unto me. Already done. All I have to do is uncover it. How do I uncover it? Through the knowledge of God. What does that word knowledge mean?
To know or to know.
To know. He says this word means the complete, precise knowledge of God or the acknowledgement of God. Now remember, this word, the word epigenosko, is the word that's represented here. And that means the complete, accurate knowledge of God. We won't have that knowledge until we are in the presence of the King. All right? We won't have that sense of the word until then. And even then, we won't know him fully. We'll still be learning. All right? But we do have the acknowledgement of God to apply to this text. So he says, you will have access to grace and peace multiplied unto you as much as you acknowledge God. I'm working. The goal is for me to get to the place of epigenosko. Yes.
So what would that look like in daily life?
He's about to tell you. We're going to go through it. Yes, sir.
In order for, and this is a question, faith to be activated, there has to be a command from God that people need to be able to obey. So when we look like through that chapter on faith, God told them to do something. And it wasn't until they did what God told them to do that the faith was activated. So I find in our daily lives, God tells us to do something. And often what he tells us to do is beyond our resources, beyond our means, beyond our control. But that's when our faith gets activated, the faith that comes from him.
Absolutely.
I mean, what we can do doesn't require faith. But what God asks us to do requires faith because it's something that's beyond our normal circumstances, so to speak.
Absolutely.
You know?
That's why the writer puts in opposition faith and sight. Because anything that is within our sight or within our reach does not require faith.
Right.
Faith begins where our sight or our ability or reach ends.
So in order to activate that understanding of God or that relationship with God, you have to act in obedience to what God told you to do. Even if other people doubt you.
Amen. Everybody understand? Amen. That's good, sir. And so he says now, so because he is given unto us, right? And so now we are uncovering, but the more we acknowledge God, as the word epigenosko, the more we acknowledge God, is the more that God uncovers grace and peace is multiplied unto us. Right. Now, these things, if we are reading this starting in verse 5, he says, besides this, giving all diligence, add to your faith virtue. Now, when he says add to, he's not actually saying for you to have addition and put with. He is saying to exercise. He's saying, so as you're operating in your knowledge of God, as you are exercising your knowledge of God, God will uncover virtue. And then as you begin to exercise in virtue, God will uncover knowledge. Does that make sense? So when he's talking about adding to, he's saying that as anybody ever been through the 12-step? Well, not been through, but anybody ever heard of the 12-step program? All right, so the 12-step program is a series of steps in sequential order that you have to go through 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up, right? You can't start at step 7 and be like, I'm going to work around these. I'm going to go through the easy ones first, and then I'm going to come back to this one because this one is a little harder for me right now. That's what Peter's telling us, that watch this, another thing says like this, the steps of a good man are what? Ordered. They are, that's the same distinction as God saying, I know the numbers of hair on your head. Not how many hair there are. Like I know that there are 7 million hairs, but I know number 736. You know, so that's the difference. All right. With this, he's saying to us, the steps are ordered. They're in order. And so as we go through these steps, God will begin to uncover what is added to that step to make us or to get us closer in our knowledge or our epigenosis of God. Does that make sense? Anybody confused? All right, go ahead.
One more time. Say what you just said.
Okay, so what he's saying is that this is a series of things that will happen. This is a series of things that will happen, not a series of things that I will make happen. Does that make sense? There's a series of things that will happen on my journey to epigenosko. And so as I'm operating in my grace, my peace, and my power, he says I'm operating in this, and as I'm operating and I'm being diligent in operating in this, meaning I'm diligent in seeing the peace of God, seeing the power of God, and seeing the grace of God. I'm diligent in that. He says, as I'm being diligent in that, what will happen is God will uncover virtue. And then as I'm working my virtue in, I'm working virtue and my peace, my grace, and my power. And then he says, as I'm working diligently in virtue, he will uncover knowledge. All right? Now, this knowledge that we're talking about in this verse is not the same knowledge that we talk about in verse 2. Verse 2, we talked about the knowledge which is called epigenosko. All right? This knowledge is the word gnosko or gnosis. All right? This refers to a more apologetic knowledge. All right? Epigenosko is a full, accurate knowledge and acknowledgement of God. Gnosko or gnosis is the same word, essentially. And it means that this is a more, one definition of it says scientific. This is a more apologetic. This is more of me being precise in learning the defense of my faith, learning to understand what I believe. This knowledge is what you would think of knowledge as being, meaning the understanding. This is more of the apologetic, exegetical knowledge. This is adding to your virtue, which we talked about. What is virtue according to the Amplified Version? What is virtue?
Virtue is
It's a
goodness.
behavior of high moral standard.
Okay, that's what. Now he says virtue in the not. That's right. But we're gonna read what it says in Amplified. He says that virtue is the. He says, and when I for this reason, he says virtue is excellence, resolution, and Christian energy. All right, this is the. I guess you would say like a moral excellence, but it's also a fervor for my relationship. All right. This is my wanting to bring God. Another translation calls this praise. This is my wanting to bring God glory. All right. So what I'm adding to this is the virtue, or the I think 2 Timothy would say it as the good report of those without.
Could you explain the tension between the diligence that we give and that adding on diligence?
The adding all diligence, when he's saying that we're adding all diligence, he's saying that he actually says down here, let me see where it says. He says, for whoever lacks these qualities is spiritually short-sighted, seeing only what is near him, and has become oblivious and to the fact that he was cleansed from his old sins. Meaning that when he's talking about being diligent, he's saying making sure that we are not just being hearers. Making sure that we're not just adding this to our head knowledge, but being sure that as we are understanding this, we are putting it to work. That's the diligence that we are offering. And then the benefit of that is God uncovering these gifts to us. All right? So it is us working, God uncovering, but the adding that he's talking about is not necessarily us acquiring new things. The only new thing we're acquiring is more understanding. That makes sense?
To break down, just what I'm getting, what you're saying is, while trusting him and practicing, things are going to be revealed to you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the best way to say it. Yes, sir.
Are there different timelines or processes for different people?
Say again?
Are there different timelines or processes for different people?
Absolutely. I would say so. I mean, this is according to what your fervor for the knowledge of God. He says you only have access to these as you, in verse 1 he says, verse 2 he says, make grace and peace. Let me go back to, I'm reading the Amplified, I'm trying not to go through all those things. He says, but in verse 2 he says, in the King James Version, verse 2 says, grace and peace be multiplied unto you through the knowledge of God and of Jesus our Lord. So he gives us access to grace and peace, but he does not give us grace and peace. Does that make sense? So you have access to it, but you only get it if you come and get it.
Yeah.
Just like I told you earlier, like if I say, I'm going to give you $30, but you got to come and get it, and you never come and get it.
Yeah.
Did I lie when I said I was going to give you $30? No, my promise is still good. You just didn't come and get it.
Like getting a paycheck, you got to go pick it up.
Right. And so when it all comes down to it, when you talk about the different processes and timelines for different people, it's according to your fervor. It's according, even Jesus says whenever he does a miracle in the Bible, you'll hear him say, according to your faith be it unto you. According to your faith be it unto you. If you had faith enough to have your daughter come back from the grave, then be it unto you. But if you only had faith enough for, to make her not as sick as she was, then be it unto you. According to your faith, be it unto you. That's interesting, right? Because Jesus never says, according to my power, be it unto you. I want the power, according to his power, I need that because that's limitless. That's all power. He never says, according to my power, be it unto you. But according to your faith, as much as you can believe, as much as you understand, as much as you come after, that's what you get.
So I know faith increases by hearing. And let's say I hear something like that you just said, and I'm like, oh, okay, so I can raise people from the dead. And then I actually try and fail. Does that mean I'm saying it but still not believing it? And then how do I increase my faith to get to that level to where I could actually, make that actually happen?
Okay.
Because I'm actually...
Those two questions. First question is, if I am saying something that I am not seeing, is it due to my faith or my lack of faith? I'm going to say generally, yes. But then I'm also going to say there's an addendum to that. Because now remember, faith comes about hearing by the word of God. If what you are believing or are saying you are having faith for is not of the word of God and the will of God, then that's not faith, that's hope. God don't operate on hope. You can hope all day long. And if you don't have faith, Apostle just said it, faith requires a word. If you don't have a word for your faith, you are operating in hope. And if you get it, you get it. If you don't, you don't. But don't blame God because you didn't operate in faith. You didn't have a word for that. All right? Faith requires a word. So the blanket answer I would say, if you are operating in faith, really operating in faith, meaning I have a word that I'm believing for, or that I'm persuaded by. That's what faith means. Remember, it's an understanding or persuasion that I completely comply with, right? And so if I am persuaded by something of the word and I am not seeing it come to pass, it is because I have a lack of faith somewhere.
What about it repeating itself?
Say again?
What about if it repeats itself?
The situation repeats itself?
Yes, over and over and over again. Is it within me?
Is the situation within you?
Yeah, I'm saying if it's something bad and it repeats itself over and over and over again, am I not doing something right? Are you understanding what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. She's saying if I keep having to go, if I just keep having to go through this storm, the disciples had to go through 3 of them. If I just had to keep going through this, is it because there's something in me that is not right. Complying? Yeah. I'm going to say the blanket answer is yes. I'm going to say the blanket answer is yes. There are 2 reasons that you continue to go through sameness. 2 reasons that you go through sameness. One, Apostle had to remind me of many times because I saw that cycle. And that's demonic. That's a spirit attached to it. Whenever you see sameness over and over and over, it's a spirit attached to it. That's one reason. The second reason you continue to go through something is because God is trying to show you something that you won't see. And so when the disciples went through the storm, the first time they're in the storm, Jesus is up at the bottom, he's asleep, and they go to him and they wild out. They say, don't you even care we're about to die? And Jesus says, if y'all had faith, we wouldn't have had to do this again. And then he says, all right, listen, no problem. I'm going to stop this because y'all not ready for this.
What about those that died in the faith? They believed it, just never seen it come to pass.
Right, because faith is not the coming to pass. Faith is the understanding that it will come to pass. Does that make sense? Yeah, so faith is the understanding that it will come. It's not necessarily me seeing it come to pass. So when Paul talks about that, he's saying to the ones that died in faith, he's saying they were still in faith because even when they died, they knew that what they believed would come. They knew that they had not believed in vain. They had a word, and they stood on the word even unto death. Faith, real faith, does not end with you. When God gives a word, it does not stop with you. God often gives words that passes generations. And so as long as I hold to the faith, I may not necessarily see the promise come to pass, but the fact that I know that the promise is good. Faith is essentially, we talk in street terms, saying, I know he's good for it. Hey, if he don't never pay me, I know he's good for it. I know he got me someday.
I guess the reason why I brought it up because you said based on her belief is why it didn't happen. In a sense. So
yeah, no, what I'm saying is that when you go through sameness, either it's a spirit attached to it or God is trying to show you something. Maybe you're not dealing with the situation correctly. Maybe there's something in the situation. Whenever you get in a situation, you start to panic. and you start to do a certain thing, or to move in a certain way, or to believe in a certain way that God is trying to break. And the only way to break it is to bring it up.
Wow.
If you got an issue with anger and you say, God, I want to be delivered from anger, guess what God's going to do? He's going to make you angry. Now, you say you want to deal with anger? Deal with it. I'm going to bring somebody that makes you mad. We think that deliverance means being away from. Well, God, I must be delivered from anger because I ain't made nobody ain't made me angry like this whole. I ain't dealt with anger this whole year. Well, you ain't met that person either. The one that used to make you angry all the time. You ain't been around them lately. That one person come back for 1 week and all of a sudden my anger just rolls up again. And God is saying, yeah, I needed it to rise up. Like if y'all ever worked in any kind of troubleshooting, like I work with computers, right? And this is people hate this when it happens today. Like they'll be at home working on their computer and the computer start acting up, right? And then they call me and say the computer is acting a fool. And I come over there and I'm ready to work and they turn the computer on and the computer just works like normal. And they say, no, they trying to do everything they can to make it act up again because they want me to see what they see so that I can work on it. That's how God does us. God says, I'm going to push that button until you see it. I'm going to keep pushing it until that spot just soar. And every time it come up, you're going to say, well, man, I got this, I got anger. And he's going to say, oh, you wasn't ready. You wasn't ready. Okay. 2 weeks later, I'm going to push that button again. Oh, you wasn't ready. You wasn't ready. I'm going to take it back. When we talk about the divine development, when God develops you, he says, no, it doesn't feel good to anybody when they're being chastened. Not for the time, but it's necessary. It's necessary for God to keep pushing that button. Whatever that button is, it's necessary because you're not seeing what he's trying to show you. Amen. Let that be your prayer. The next time you go through it, instead of saying, God, get me out of it, say, God, show me what I'm supposed to see in it.
Can you ignore it?
Say again? You can ignore it, and you'll go through it over and over and over and over. And the thing of it is, what we're talking about now is the closer I get to God, the more he will expose those parts of you. That's why when you ever see somebody who really trying to get a relationship with God, it seems like they might start jumping off track immediately. As soon as I say I'm going to study again, God says, okay, well, you can't come in here like that. Let me show you where you got to work with this first. And you say, oh, I was studying, I was getting good, and then now I'm closing the Bible. I don't want to. And God's saying, in order for you to get closer, I need you to see that. I need you to deal with that. The closer you get to me, the more things of impurity have to fall off of you. And believe it or not, impurity does not fall off of you by itself. He says, if any man desire to come out of me, he must first what? Deny himself. You got to put away your nature. Paul says, I crucify my flesh daily. Why crucify, Paul? Because it won't die on its own.
That's right.
Yes, sir.
Some of the things that people describe from pastoring people and counseling, some things require different levels of faith. Like some people only have a little faith, and so some circumstances require them to have greater faith. You know, and I know there's different levels of faith, but I was wondering, are there different types of faith?
I would say that there are different types of faith because if my understanding of faith says that faith is understanding or knowledge, right? And so we just talked about two different kinds of knowledge that exist. That there is gnosko, epignosko, and prognosko, which I believe all coincide with forms of faith. Gnosko is the complete, epignosko is the complete knowledge of God. That is me trusting God completely. That is me after I have had gnosko, which is, gnosko means learning to learn. Does that make sense? Gnosko is the process of learning how to know. All right? So there is a gnosko faith that is me learning God. That's me trusting God but not really understanding God. Then there is what I call the epignosko faith, which is me knowing God and trusting God because I know God. And then there is the prognosko faith, which is the foretelling or the foreknowledge of God, meaning that I knew he was going to do it before he did it because I know God. Does that make sense? Minor.
Because I was gonna tell the young lady over here, God is trying to bring her to a greater level of faith. That's why the Bible says we go from faith to faith.
That's what I was gonna say.
You know, we go from one level of faith to another level of faith, and the reason why you keep going through what you're going through is because to get through it is going to require a greater level of faith. You can't operate at the same level of faith that you used to operate.
So I gotta go up.
You gotta increase. You gotta go up. You know, and it's almost like as we live this life, it's like going through school.
Yeah.
If I were to see you and you're still in the first grade at your age, I would think something's wrong with you. You know, because you should have a higher level of advancement just from being in school. Otherwise, what's the purpose of going to school if you're not learning anything, if you're not advancing through the grade? You know, when we come to the house of God, we ought to increase in our faith.
Amen.
To go from one level to the next. We shouldn't stay in kindergarten or nursery school. You know what I mean? After having been in church for 20 years.
Wow.
We should be operating at a doctorate level of faith.
Amen.
And while you were talking, the Lord said, I'm trying to increase her faith.
Thank you.
That's what the Holy Spirit did.
Wow.
So we decree that your faith will increase. That you'll go to the next level. And then once you get to that level, guess what? It's going to take another level of faith.
I know it.
You know, we tend to think that if I get more income, if I get more resources, if I get more people in my life, that my life would be better. Nope, it's going to take faith to live at that level too.
Amen.
Wow.
Every level that you're at in God is going to take faith to live at that level. So whether it's in the hundreds, the thousands, the millions, it's still going to take faith.
That's true.
All right, we are officially out of time.
Nah, we want more. Sit up there and teach us more. It ain't 9 o'clock yet.
At this time, I'm gonna hand it over. Oh, Will.
Yeah, no, it's not a question, but I wanted to say